Hello and welcome back to the Smells Like Identity Hygiene podcast. Today we have a special guest with us, Kathryn Shih. Kathryn is an entrepreneur in residence at Forgepoint Capital, where she helps entrepreneurs develop effective AI strategy. Prior to her role at Forgepoint, Kathryn was a group product manager at Google, where she most recently led the Security AI Workbench team and trained generative AI security-specific workloads. Kathryn holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BS in computer science from MIT. Welcome, Kathryn.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here.
So I think the last time you and I spoke, or at least spoke in person, was at the Sphere 360 Summit, where we actually did a bunch of sessions around AI and really around how AI is going to affect cybersecurity and how it is affecting cybersecurity, whether it is from a threat perspective or from a kind of protection perspective. So we'll dive right in, and I have been looking forward to this conversation. I know you are a wealth of knowledge with AI, and especially in the realm of security. So I guess my first question is, in your view, what is the aspect of AI that has had the biggest impact on security, either positive or negative?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to cite a single most impactful dimension because one of the things I think we don't necessarily realize is that even before the current generative AI boom, AI has really been threaded through a lot of systems for a very long time. If you benefit from having a spam filter that helps catch malicious emails as well as just junk you don't want to waste time on, like that's AI and that's been around for over a decade now. There's tons of just classifiers throughout all sorts of systems we use on a daily basis, secured and otherwise, that decide like, is this content good or bad? Is this content benign or malicious? And that's all AI, and it really boils an ocean of data in ways that people couldn't. So I think there's been just tremendous investment there for a very long time, and it has made security different than what it otherwise would have been. On the other side of things, it's hard to say exactly how attackers use AI, but it contributes to productivity increases on both sides. And I'm confident that without naming any individual attack that was necessarily AI powered, we certainly are going to see, and I'm sure already have seen, more attacks. Because if you give anyone a productivity increase, they do more of the thing they like to do.
So actually, let's talk about the dark side of AI. So let's talk about some of the ways that the bad guys are using AI today, and the ways that you think that some of these more sophisticated ways of kind of leveraging the technology could go in the future.
Yeah, so I think for bad guys today, there's actually been a couple folks publishing information. So, for example, a few months ago, Microsoft published some findings on how people had actually, or how threat actors in particular, had been caught using generative AI on the Microsoft platform. And I think the consensus there is that folks are using it for the classic productivity increase, like helping AI write scripts. Those scripts just happen to be up to no good at all. People are also using AI to research long tail concepts. Like you want to attack some industrial network, you need to learn about the industrial network, and AI can be super helpful for condensing, finding that knowledge. It can also be helpful to attackers for, say, writing compelling English language content if you want to sound like you're a native speaker when you really aren't, and just kind of up leveling your ability to impersonate communication from individual people and specific styles, etc. I think one kind of notable place for AI for attackers is if anyone was tracking things like the attempted XEUtils backdoor earlier this year, part of that attack was the creation of of at least one realistic fictitious persona and probably a couple. That's the kind of thing AI can be really, really good at. It can help you draft a compelling backstory for someone. It can help create a history of content for a fictitious persona, and it can help you assume kind of a communication and writing style that's utterly unlike your own in order to have this very compelling fake identity. And you could imagine a lot of ways attackers can put that to use. The XE attack was only one of them.
Yeah, and I guess in kind of learning a persona, could it not also potentially learn the writing patterns? We've all gotten the email or text message from your CEO, I need you to go get a bunch of gift cards from Target. I wonder if in the future it could learn the actual writing patterns of the person that they're attempting to mimic, right? So that they can, when you do get that text message, it actually does sound like it came from your CEO. Right now, I'll get those and it'll say Rita Gurvich. It's like, well, Rita would never put her full name at the end of a text message, right? That's not how she signs off her text messages. And I wonder, is that something where, and are you seeing where, it's kind of learning the pattern of the person that you would use to then attack the victim?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely within the realm of easy possibility for AI. I would also point out this is a place where it's kind of a dual use technology because there's already AI models out there that are intended to, say, learn your writing style and help you compose emails that sound completely natural and just like you. So there's a very benign use case for the exact same technology, but then it can be repurposed for this much more malevolent end. I think the big question for attackers is just how much of a sample of someone's writing can they get, and how representative is that sample of the communication they need to impersonate. So, for example, if you're an attacker and you want to pretend to be Rita in order to tell her team that she really needs $5,000 of Target gift cards, like right now, you'll be training on just her public communications, but it's entirely possible that when Rita is posting blogs and posting on LinkedIn and speaking at conferences, she has like a way more formal tone than when she's texting her team. So one challenge for attackers might be that to the extent someone has kind of a more casual tone or assumes like a bit of a different style when they're a little more off the record, just getting the right data corpus to figure out what that style is like in order to impersonate it might be harder. But that caveat aside, the idea that given some chunk of written or spoken media, you can assume someone's style. I think there's already plenty of proofs of that. Like a few weeks ago, I saw this pretty funny video where if you ever saw the old like the BBC Planet Earth documentaries, I'm blanking
Hmm.
on the narrator, but there's now an AI model that will sound like him and be like, the hyper little dog does this. Yeah, it's the same technology.
Right. And I guess, in terms of where things are going, in terms of kind of, we're seeing these things out in the wild right now, and we're seeing kind of it develop. Do you have some idea of where this is eventually going to go as AI matures? As we think about the idea of the Will Smith eating spaghetti video, right? The notorious Will Smith eating spaghetti, of just everything looking clearly not a real video, versus what it can do today in terms of small video clips, or what we saw from ChatGPT, several months ago. That really escalated development of AI. In your view, what are going to be the threats of the future that people should look out for?
Yeah. I mean, I think on this topic in particular, the threat of the future is going to be that right now we kind of assume that if someone looks and sounds like a person you're familiar with over a digital media, that it's them because we're used to, like, Rosario, we've talked in person, we've interacted. It's kind of deep in my brainstem that no no reasonable organization has access to like the skill level of actor and prosthetics and everything it would take to have someone be sitting here looking and sounding like you but not actually being you. I think that assumption is going to have to break, and we're going to need some combination of better verification or like cryptographic signatures. There's other ways of verifying communication channels that we now kind of innately trust. More broadly, I think this is one area where we're going to see attackers gain capabilities that they don't have today. But I think in general, we need to be prepared for just attacker productivity increases the same way folks are planning for productivity increases for AI enabled employees across their organizations. And that means that there needs to be a commensurate productivity increase for defenders because otherwise, it's not like attackers are going to go retire. They're just going to get to attack more things. And so defenders need to be prepared for more volume of attacks across the board, but particularly for higher volumes of attacks in areas where there's these new attacker capabilities, like making compelling impersonations, particularly for folks who have some amount of public media associated with their name.
And I guess, outside of that, what can some of these organizations do today in preparation for that, right? I mean, for that eventuality where essentially you can't trust any video, you can't trust any text message, audio message. What else could they do in preparation for that eventuality where they really can't trust their eyes and ears,
Yeah,
right?
well, I would say it's not that you won't be able to trust anything, but there's a lot of process things you can do to significantly increase trustworthiness here. So, for example, you can have a procedure where if somebody calls claiming to be the CFO, employees should always say, great, thank you. And kind of the same way we've trained people, like, don't click the link in the email from your bank, I go to bank.com and access your account there. Rather than trusting this incoming communication that you don't really know where it's coming from, always say, okay, let me call you back on a known number, and then call the CFO back on the phone number you know to be theirs. For bonus points, make it a landline versus a cell phone that could be vulnerable to a SIM swap attack. You can also do things like have you can have just additional verification. So you can be like, that requires other communication channels. So you can be like, okay, yes, I'm near a computer or I have my phone. I totally get your request, but I'm just going to need you to email me from your corporate account a copy of it so that we can kind of verify that you have the level of access that we all think. And the more you can set in place procedures around this as an organization, the more you can give employees air cover to push back on what may be senior folks, being like, it's nothing personal, I'm just following the procedure. The procedure super clearly says I have to do this, so please help me out and do it. The other casual thing folks can do is, I know a couple friends who've worked with AI and who have actually just set up kind of the equivalent of code words. So, like, one friend I know has some teenage kids, and he's specifically worried about some of the stories you've heard of fake AI voices calling and being like, Dad, I've been in a car crash and I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere and I need you just to like Venmo me $1,000 so I can get home. He's basically taught his kids, hey, if you ever have an emergency call like this, here's this random 3-word code. You say these 3 words, I'll send you the money immediately, but no words, no money. So like there can be some very low tech procedures like that where you just have some way to establish identity beyond the person looking or sounding like you think they should.
A very human way of defeating AI, basically, by having some prearranged, very analog. Here's the 3 words. I actually have something similar with myself and my wife, where there's a keyword that if she ever calls me and says that keyword, I immediately have to hang up and call 911, right? And only
Yeah.
she and I know that word, and my son. Um, so, talking about ways that organizations can protect themselves and ways that AI can actually be used for good, let's shift gears a little bit, right? Let's talk about what are ways that organizations can actually use AI for good, whether it is, just general, around security or just in general ways that AIs can be leveraged to kind of defeat some of these issues that the bad things that AI will introduce.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I already mentioned just in general, I think security is just one big, you'd say, classification problem. Like security is all about deciding, is this anomaly actually a problem or is it just something a little bit unusual happen? And that's a place where we've been deploying AI as an industry for decades now with just more and more power behind it. And you can imagine if you had, like, in computer science, you kind of call it like an oracle. If you had the anomaly detector that was perfect and that could say, is this thing really a problem versus good, then security would kind of be solved. We're obviously nowhere near that. But as AI gets more and more powerful, I do think that our classifiers are going to get better and better. And then you can, achieve more with fewer people. You have more ability to just automatically say, oh my gosh, we have a problem over here. Let's get on it. So I think that we're going to see just continued investment in that area, and it's really going to help defenders. I also think one of the challenges for security for a long time has been that security has tons of what we'd call like unstructured or semantic data. So there's all sorts of things you want to analyze from a security perspective where, maybe there's a ton of weird emails going between some employee and some external source, and you want to know, is this employee up to no good? Well, historically, you needed a person to go read those emails and decide what they meant. But one of the things we kind of see with not just generative AI, but some of the transformers that, well, I guess not just like LLMs, but some of the transformers that have come before them is increasingly AI can actually handle semantic data and can start to say, like, is one of these topics being discussed at a high level? Do I think this employee is actually engaging any of these not cool, um, not cool activities? And so we're gaining the ability to automatically analyze more and more data types. Similarly, there's things like tons of information is being exchanged on the dark web. We're gaining more and more ability to automatically analyze the semantic data across the dark web and draw interesting conclusions from that. So all of those things are kind of coming into scope for defenders. And then again, the same way that attackers get a productivity increase, defenders also get productivity increases from AI. And you can have just one person keeping tabs on more and more things.
It almost sounds like an arms race, right? Of kind of the bad guys and the good guys. I mean, you could argue it's always been that way with security, right? As you develop more sophisticated ways of attacking, you have to develop more sophisticated ways of protecting what is currently being attacked. But I guess does AI really change anything in kind of that landscape of an arms race? Does it make things worse in some cases? And more importantly, do you think companies are prepared in terms of having the technical knowledge, the understanding of how to properly leverage AI to properly protect against this new threat?
Yeah, so there's a couple different questions in there. I for sure agree with the, it's an arms race and it's been an arms race for a while angle. I think for whether it gets better or worse, I think that's a kind of a little bit TBD. I think new technology in general, I think it doesn't necessarily help attackers and defenders in the same way. So let's take generative AI again. I think one of the places where it clearly helps attackers, or at least clearly to me, helps attackers a bit more than defenders, is the ability to impersonate people. Defenders have often a relatively low need to impersonate folks, whereas attackers stand to gain a lot from it. So that technology in particular is kind of asymmetric in who it benefits. On the other hand, being able to bulk analyze semantic data, I'd argue that probably favors defenders a bit more than attackers, because attackers do benefit from that. Like, they can start to map out the attack surface a bit better, and they can do more reconnaissance before they actually start attacking an organization. But I think in general, you probably have classically seen defenders struggle more to analyze large amounts of semantic data than you have attackers. So that one's probably asymmetric in the other direction. I think it's just, I mean, I'm also someone who's relatively conservative about placing big bets, but I think one of the things that we'll see over the next couple of years is just there's different asymmetries across this. Who ends up benefiting more? I think kind of TBD, and also it's going to be a function of which sides do a better job. And I don't know if attackers really commercialize stuff, but scaling technology and making it ready to be used across large numbers of organizations. So I think there's some uncertainty, and I think there's just a lot of, we're going to have to see whether this space is one where the asymmetries end up favoring one side versus the other. My suspicion is that the arms race is going to continue on more or less an even footing, because I think we'll see attackers need to deploy resources until they can at least get back to the status quo. And when you look across all of the organizations with well-funded defense, there's a lot of ability to increase resource deployment until you can get back to the status quo. So that would kind of be my base assumption. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess the for the defenders, right? Would you argue that they're kind of at a disadvantage because there's one group of defenders and there potentially be even hundreds of thousands of attackers, and you could argue the larger the organization, the more public the organization, chances are, yes, they do have a bigger budget for those defenders, but they also become a much bigger target. And if AI allows you to kind of escalate or make attacks easier, for example, is it an arms race, but are the defenders in a disadvantage just because of the sheer number of potential attackers that might want to come in?
I'm not totally sure I would agree with that. I think there are probably individual instances of defenders where the attackers are like, I must get this particular person. Many companies, like militaries, come to mind there. There's probably very specific motivations for some cohorts of attackers to specifically attack individual military units. On the other hand, as you start looking towards industry, where attackers will very, very specifically want to go after a single target. Like that target may have something that's uniquely high value. I remember some time ago, Google, for example, was specifically attacked because, at least I think the thinking was, and I had no involvement whatsoever in this is all off public news sources, but I remember reading that attackers were specifically after some journalist emails that were on Gmail. So in that case, like you may see an individual organization picked out because they have this specific chunk of high value data. I think there have also been instances of attackers going after, say, Microsoft's Office 360 email accounts. But I think for most companies, what you really see more is the attackers want to install some ransomware and they want to make a bunch of money. Maybe they're after specific industries, but it's not clear to me that they're really like, this is the hospital system I will take down. And so to that end, I think if you're a defender and you manage to get to the top quartile of like hardened organizations, you're not an easy target. And it's not clear to me that the attackers will actually be like, let's put more effort into this target versus just moving on. So I think it's a many to many mapping for the most part on both sides. And if an attacker is top quartile or top 10% in terms of technical competence, they probably get more targets they can choose from. Conversely, if a defender manages to get to top quartile, top 10%, there's probably more cases where the attackers just go get their Bitcoin somewhere else.
Okay. So I know you work with a lot of companies around their AI strategy. What are the use cases that you're seeing the organizations that you work with kind of focus on when it comes to their AI strategy?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a couple different categories. One is, going back to the classification, organizations that have at scale classification problems, many of these folks already have large AI investments, and those investments are going to continue. Trying to classify complex data is just a great fit for AI. It has been, it will continue to be. I think there's a couple other places where we see more emerging AI bets in the face of generative AI. And those often, I'd say, take one of a couple forms. One is folks who have large amounts of semantic data where they think they can start to extract new insights. So for example, if people have lots of like historically written data about security, like incidents or vulnerabilities or something like that, the fact that it's now possible or now becoming possible to at scale parse that means you can start to do more interesting trend detection, prediction, et cetera, off those kind of data sets. So that's one area of investment. Another area of very general investment is that organizations that have just tons of people working on security, I was mentioning productivity increases, I think have at least started to question, how can I get AI to really improve the velocity and the productivity of people? And I don't think there's really a one size fits all solution there. But a lot of it comes down to looking at the workforce now and saying, where do I have the most people spending the most time on tasks that are kind of have to be done but are maybe low value. So this is where you see folks like having all of the note-taking assistants or having things that just kind of start taking jobs where it really doesn't benefit from the extended education and training of folks and move that onto the system so that people can then deploy the reasoning and the education that they've spent so much time investing in more consistently across the workday. So you get higher value labor out of the folks you have. I think that's an area that's going to be big. But again, depending on what the organization's doing, it's really hard to say this is the answer. I think figuring out the answer there starts with really carefully and thoughtfully looking at what folks are actually doing today and where the high value versus low value part of each person's day is.
So for an organization that maybe it's not a technology organization, and they really haven't done anything around AI, around their cybersecurity programs, outside of maybe purchasing some software that has elements of AI built in. What should they do to get started? Like, what should they be thinking about? What should they be looking for in the products that they're looking to purchase in terms of, okay, this is something that is, nothing's future-proof, but at least it's getting them ready for this eventuality of, much more AI-based attacks?
Yeah, I would definitely be thinking about things from a productivity angle. So if you're preparing for significantly more AI generated attacks, then in some combination, you need to be scaling up your team or making your team more productive. Of those two, making your team more productive is probably a little bit more attractive for a lot of folks. Scaling teams is hard. And I think scaling a team by more than like 25% is extremely hard because you start to run into questions of how do you keep your culture, how do you train all your new folks without distracting your existing ones, etc. So the answer may be a mix. You may scale your team a little bit and then look to improve productivity. But as you look to improve productivity, then this is going to come back to, for all the tools you're using today, where does your team feel like there's just the biggest waste of time? Like, where do they feel like they're spending time just dragging around widgets in a UI or something versus being able to really add value to the security process? And when you think about vendors, thinking about the total cost of ownership, not just in terms of maintenance and servers and all that, but in terms of how much human labor does this tool take to operate? That's kind of the reflection of how productive a tool does or doesn't enable your organization to be. And if you're trying to get ready to scale your team, you need things that have a low total cost of ownership in terms of human hours, not just dollars of license.
Okay. So this is great. I have just two more questions for you. The first question is there anything that I forgot to ask? Is there anything that you think is important for our listeners to know when it comes to cybersecurity and AI that I just didn't ask that you can think of?
I think one thing I would say is that AI, it's not magic and it's powerful, but it's not a panacea. So when you're looking at vendors, and maybe this is something I should have just said last question, a vendor who promises the AI is going to do everything, I would be a little bit suspicious. I think people should be able to articulate, here's things the AI is trained for, here's things an AI system is trained for, and here's where the boundaries of that training is. And the more people are able to articulate kind of what is in scope versus not in scope for the system to really be good, the more they've probably thought about this, and the more you're probably getting an honest answer on capabilities. Someone who tells you that AI is going to replace like every human function you have in the next 12 months, I'd be a little bit suspicious there. I think it's, at the very least, you should ask them how they've managed to test this assertion in order to verify it.
Okay. So this was awesome. We always end the podcast with one fun question. So the fun question for today is, given that last week was the Olympics, the question today is, what would be your Olympic sport of choice and why?
So is this a sport where I have to compete with the skills I have now, or is this like a sport where I'm just going to go watch it and cheer, or?
You know what? Maybe, so it would be you competing. So maybe we could do it both. We could do one that you think you would really enjoy competing in, and one where you think you would be competitive in.
I think I am not competitive with Olympians at anything. Those people have trained for decades of their life, and it's amazing what they can do. But I have no illusions of being, I don't know, maybe I could compete with some 7-year-old who hopes to someday go to the Olympics, but I think that's about it for me. If I was going to choose a sport where I could miraculously become competitive, I would actually pick swimming because I am the world's lousiest swimmer today. And there's a lot of things I would love to do more of. Like, I would really like to learn to surf. And if I was a much more competent swimmer, I think it would be much easier to do that.
So you'd wanna figure out a way to. So if you could magically get, Michael Phelps level swimming, that's the sport that you would choose. Now, would it be kind of I don't even know the 100 meters, the 200 meter. I know the racing is 100 meter, but would you go like more long distance or like a triathlon kind of thing, or more of kind of the sprinting kind of one lap kind of swimming?
I guess if my goal is to be more prepared to do something like learn to surf, I'll go for short sprints, right? I think surfing is all
Yeah.
about having a powerful stroke for a brief period of time. I could also just
I would
choose
imagine
swimming.
endurance, right? I mean, for surfing, you
Yeah.
probably need a lot of endurance to constantly try to find that wave and being out there and then falling off and getting back on probably needs some element of endurance, I would think.
There you go. I could also just pick surfing directly since it's in the Olympics now and was fun to watch.
Sure.
There's a couple other water sports I'd like to be able to do better. Like I'd like to learn to whitewater kayak.
So I think for me, I would probably pick, I was thinking volleyball because I used to love volleyball, but nowhere near competitive whatsoever. I think I'd lose to a 7-year-old right now. So this was awesome. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I think, definitely if you're up for it, would love to have you come back. I think, your understanding of both AI and security just uniquely puts you in this position to kind of really talk about these topics. And I always enjoy every conversation with you. So thanks again, Kathryn. And it was great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it was great talking.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Smells Like Identity Hygiene. Smells Like Identity Hygiene is a production of Sphere Technology Solutions, and our producer is Matthew Flink. Until next time.